everybody? Welcome back to the Resleevables here on YouTube. I am your host, Cedric Phillips, at Cedric A. Phillips on all of the things, and I am joined by Patrick Sullivan at Basic Mountain, but what are you the biggest fan of today? Sushi's biggest fan. How's that sound?
I had sushi for lunch.
There you go.
It's true.
You're a big sushi guy. Rainbow roll.
No, that's not what I got.
But you like a rainbow roll.
I do.
Okay, that's good. Do you like artifacts and lots of them? Because that's what we've got for everybody today.
Artifacts and things that care about them.
When we did our little pre-show, we confirmed, I know you said at the exit of our last episode of Arabian Nights, that every card in Antiquities either is an artifact, taps for colorless mana, or it says artifact on the card.
100%.
That is 100% confirmed. So Wizards of the Coast, they came to this set with a plan.
Oh, yeah. And it's pretty impressive coming off the heels of Arabian Nights, which is, there's some world building there.
Yep.
A little bit of a tone to it, but it's largely derived from real world storytelling.
Yep.
And to go from, and as far as mechanics goes, there's some stuff going on, but nothing that you would call mechanical cohesion. Going from that to what I would describe as kind of Magic's first modern set in a lot of respects. Now, there are some ways that it's also extremely antiquated, but there are some ways where it is Magic's first set that abides by certain design principles that we see all the way up into sets today. Mainly one, there is a storyline that involves Magic-specific characters and protagonists in a conflict. And two, the set is oriented around, if not a mechanic, at least a mechanical theme, in this case, artifacts.
Artifacts aplenty coming up here on today's episode, in which we are reviewing Antiquities. We're going to get to the facts of the set right now. Alrighty, let's kick things off as we always do here on the Resleevables with the facts of the set. Antiquities is Magic's second expansion. It's not part of any block. It stands all on its own. It's constructed around an artifact theme, as we have told you already, but what we haven't told you is that it tells the story of the Brothers' War between Mishra and Urza. It's the first set to use multiple versions of a card with different artwork outside of the core set's basic lands. When we get into our core sets many moons down the road, we will talk about that. And the only expansion to use multiple versions of non-basic lands. So when we talk about that, we are talking about a couple cards in particular.
Urza's Tower, Power Plant, and Mine.
Correct.
Mishra's Factory.
4.
Strip Mine.
Bang. I learned from this guy over here that Strip Mine, turns out there are 4 different artworks. Doesn't really look like it, but it's true.
It's a little odd because the different artworks for Mishra's Factory and the Urza lands are so distinct.
Yes.
And the Strip Mine is show a slightly different hole in the ground 4 times, but there are 4 different pieces of art for Strip Mine.
There are. Antiquities was released on March 4th, 1994, printed on sheets of 121 cards. The print run was announced by Wizards of the Coast to be 15 million cards, and it was available from purchase from mid-March 1994 through late April 1994, so not a huge window there. Booster boxes contained 60 booster packs. Antiquities packs, however, were not entirely random. Apparently, players had to buy more than one box to complete the 100-card set, and Wizards of the Coast created the Antiquities buyback program. Maybe that's where they got the buyback mechanic from, I don't know, where players could send up to 100 cards back to receive cash back.
So I consider myself to be something of a historian of this era of Magic. This is the first I've heard of this. I've never heard about this prior to this. I don't know of anyone who ever did this.
Okay.
And anyone who did this probably feels pretty bad.
Yeah, they're probably down a couple bucks.
They're probably down a couple bucks.
Yeah, that's certainly to be true. The Antiquity set symbol. Let's go over that. It's an anvil. Now, of course, if you were with us for our Arabian Nights episode, that was the introduction of set symbols where they had a scimitar, and now we've got an anvil. The anvil is meant to symbolize the artifact focus of the set. I think the set symbol succeeds here as far as kind of being a descriptor of what the set is.
Yeah, no, I think they nailed that one for sure.
For those of you who want to know how many cards are in the set, 85 black border cards, We'll do our little rundown here. There were 28 commons, 2 at C6, 1 at C5, and 25 at C4. There's 37 uncommons, 2 at C1, 2 at U3 plus C1, 29 at U3, and 4 at U2. And then there are 20 rares, and those are at U1. This strange distribution that I just went over comes from the lands Mishra's Factory, Strip Mine, Urza's Mine, Power Plant, and Tower, aka the Urzatron, which have 4 different pieces of art in the set, as Patrick did mention. So you've got those cards sitting at different spots on the sheet. Mishra's Factory and Strip Mine have 3 versions at U1 and 1 at C1. Urza's Mine and Urza's Power Plant have 2 versions at C1 and 2 at C2. And then Urza's Tower has 3 versions at C1 and 1 at C2, which we saw this a little bit in Arabian Nights. We're going to see it again here. Makes it a little bit debatable on how many cards are actually in the set. Collectors view Antiquities as a 100-card set, even though I said there are 85. We're going to let you be the final arbiter. How many cards are in this set?
I call it 100.
Okay.
As opposed to Arabian Nights, which has the light-dark thing going on, that never really drove any sort of collector demand in a real way. People have very specific preferences for the alternate artworks in this set, and they're also not identical rarities. So if you go to any secondary market site, the place where this is most pronounced is Winter Mishra's Factory versus all the other ones. Yeah. It's worth considerably more money. Part of that is a preference over the art, and part of that is its rarity. And so I'm happy to call this a 100-card set, even though there's some similarities with the Arabian Nights stuff, but this is distinct enough and drives collectability enough that I would call these distinct cards.
End of the day, 85, 100. There's not a lot of cards in this set.
No, it's very small.
That we know for sure. Let's go to who designed this bad boy. It's designed by Big Five, Scaff Elias, Jim Lynn, Joel Mick, Chris Page, and Dave Petty. And you're going to find that it was also developed by the same 5 people. So let's dive into that a little bit here. You got a set that's designed, developed by the same folks. Nowadays, to the best of my knowledge, there are people who design cards at Wizards of the Coast, and there's like a play design team, and then there's like a play testing team, and it's very, one pocket here, one pocket here, very separate experience for folks to be able to create the best experience overall and not really muddy the waters. This is the direct opposite, which doesn't surprise you because it's the earliest stages of the game. But what's the impact that this has?
Well, another thing is there's also only like 85 cards.
Yeah, sure.
So what do we mean by balancing?
Okay.
Also, this is before the notion of booster draft. And a lot of play designs resources are devoted to balancing draft. So that's not a consideration here.
Okay.
So I would push back against the notion that it's very, very siloed today. There is some truth to that. But while I was over at Wizards of the Coast, the set lead would often sit in, if not actively participate, in some of the play design meetings, because you run into these spots where, let's say play design says something's too strong. They want to pull back on it in some way. It's useful to have the initial designer there to say, well, these were the goals that I was going for. So then if you can come up with a solution that aligns with the goals, then that's great. And the initial designer has probably considered alternatives to the design already while they're working on it, so they might have a quick and easy fix. You don't want to have 100% porting over of design to development, 1, because they're different skills, and 2, because there is something of a moral hazard. Developers want the sets to be balanced,
yep,
and designers, consciously or not, to varying degrees, do want their stuff to be powerful and exciting. So you do want to silo it off a little bit, but there is some use to having someone who knows the entire vision of design working with the developers towards the end of the process to guide them in spots where something needs to change and what's the best solution to that.
So this would be the point right now where, look, I have used all my facts of the set, and we would normally move on to our next stage of the show. But before we jump there, let's just talk about the swing that they're taking with this set. Either all artifacts, taps for colorless mana, or mentions artifacts. So artifacts, whether you like it or not. And I say that because there's some people who are probably not very passionate about artifacts, right? So when you kind of draw this line in the sand with your second expansion, the early stages of your game, you're taking a pretty big risk by, I guess I'll say alienating some people who just aren't really into this. And I don't know how catastrophic that could have potentially been for them.
Well, part of it is still we're bottlenecked by card availability.
Okay.
So it's not like people are out there buying cases and cases and breaking it. Certainly there's nothing like Magic Online or Magic Arena where these decks get iterated really, really quickly. So to some extent, you have some protection from this experience by people are just more or less still buying a couple packs and adding the cards to the deck.
Okay.
I do believe this execution is way too extreme. 100% of the cards being an artifact or referencing artifacts is just too much of the set. If I'm random person with my Llanowar Elves and Qualworms and I'm opening up a pack and just where's the card for me to play with, I think that's really, really rough. I also think creatively, there is an argument for doing it this way. Certainly it sets a feel for the place, but it also compresses the world in a way that's a little bit weird. Like even in a war, there is random civilians and, bakers and accountants and politicians, and none of that is really reflected here. It's a very narrow view of the world. I actually think the world becomes richer if like half the cards care about artifacts and half the cards do not.
Which is what you would see nowadays. Exactly.
Yeah. It's Magic does not do 100% of a thing. Part of it is you want to make sure that the set has cards for everyone, and when you make it all about a thing, some people will not have cards for themselves. And then also it makes the world feel more alive to have variety. Lastly, if memory serves, I could be incorrect about this, but if memory serves, there are no common artifacts in Alpha Beta Unlimited.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if there's any in Arabian Nights either. So you're talking about a mechanic which only appears at uncommon and above anyway. And we're talking about people having very limited collections because there's just not that much out there. So even if you like artifacts as a conceit, you probably don't own that many. It's really rough to do exactly this there's some things about this set that I think are brilliant and you can learn a lot from. It's really rough to do this today in 2023 with people having massive collections and digital collections and easy sorting and the ability to basically build whatever deck they want at a moment's notice. Going back in time, building an artifact deck when you own like a conservator and like a clockwork beast, and those are all the artifacts I own.
Sure.
It's really rough to build around the cards that appear in the set by and large.
And your example there is, I think, extreme, but I think appropriately so, because again, there's not that many cards. The game is really brand new. So it is entirely possible that as a player, because you think of all the access that we have now with websites and, eBay and everything, right? You want any card you want, you can theoretically just go buy, right? That was not the case when this was happening. It was just you open a booster pack and, I don't even know if there were anything resembling like conventions and meeting spaces where it's like, hey, do you guys want to like go to this place on this weekend and play and trade? Like you said, if you had like a clockwork beast and a conservator, it's entirely possible that's the only artifacts that you had and that were near where you lived.
I played tournaments around this time a little bit later, local card shops. We're not talking any sort of big regional events, although that came pretty soon down the line for me. And this is sort of before the internet was a ubiquitous tool.
We're so old.
I regularly had the experience of playing against people at the card shop and then playing a card I'd never seen before in my life.
I missed that.
That's how different of an era we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So to circle it back, I don't think you're supposed to do 85 cards and they're all artifacts or care about artifacts anyway. But it's especially rough back then when they're at higher rarities and people don't have coherent collections anyway.
Those are the facts of Antiquities. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we are diving into the flavor of the storyline and the lore of this artifact-based set. We are back for the lore, the flavor, the storyline of Antiquities. Now, again, if you were with us for our Arabian Nights episode, you know that they based it off of like a book a little bit and some real world stuff. But this is really kind of the first jump into, we should probably start establishing our own world within this space, which is actually kind of cool. And it happened maybe a little earlier than I thought it would in Magic's history, but that's where we are. So let's go over some brief notes here on what's going on in Antiquities. We already mentioned Mishra and Urza a little bit. Ancient artifacts of the Thran Empire are discovered on the continent of, let's hope I get this right, Terrasare, including many advanced machines of war. Two brothers, Urza and Mishra, discover a stone in the caves of Koilos. We know that card. But when they disturb it, it splits in two, Mightstone and Weakstone, which are cards in this set, Unleashing the evil of Phyrexia, we know that. On Dominaria, we're very familiar with that. The ancient machines of the Thran are employed in battle once again as the Brothers' War takes place, an epic war between Urza and Mishra for control of both halves of the stone. We also know that the Mightstone and the Weakstone is actually a magic card now, in addition to Mightstone being a card and Weakstone being a card. The war culminates in the Silex Blast, also a card, plunging the world into the Ice Age, which is a set. So, let's go over what's going on here, because those are some big key buzzwords that have been made into Magic cards, Magic worlds, names of Magic sets in some instances. They established these things early on, and they are being used 30 years later.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most fertile ground probably of any Magic set creatively in terms of what it gave in the future. You have Urza, which eventually got a block named after, and Mishra, a name over 1 million cards. Phyrexians, one of the key, if not the key villain in the Magic universe. And so that architecture got laid down in the set, and it's still being used today.
Pretty wild for them to be able to think of these things at this time. And I am not a world builder at all, so I have no idea what kind of goes into the thought process or any of that stuff. But to be able to think of a storyline, kind of establish it, and then have it be used not just 30 years later, but 5 years later, 10 years later. And now we've come to a set called The Brothers' War, in which it has multiple copies of Urza and Mishra, and they're telling a story. You know, we have Silex Blast. We have Mightstone and Weakstone come from this set as individual cards and come together as the Mightstone and the Weakstone as an artifact in a future set. Phyrexia, as you mentioned, still scary stuff that's used today. Dominaria, I think that's the first world I think of when I think of Magic, right? So it's pretty impressive stuff for them to, I guess, I'll say for lack of a better term, get it right this early.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's some amount of, you know, the initial rulebook says in Alpha says, you are a planeswalker. And how do you communicate that a character in a storyline like this is both more powerful than you and different from you? How do you get the impression that you are not like Mishra or Urza? And that is a nod towards doing something like Artifacts Matter. Putting enough emphasis on this specific place and these specific characters to make it feel like, oh, I'm not just like them. They do their own thing. They're part of their own storyline. They're more powerful than I am. And that's reflected in the fact that the set that's featuring them for the first time feels very different than the sets that came previous.
So future sets, of course, over Magic's history, they get more and more detailed with the flavor, which is a very good thing. I think that's a reason that people play this game, is they enjoy the flavor of the game, right? And we go to different worlds, different universes, and we see crazy new things happen. You know, I think of when Magic went to Ikoria, and, you know, now we see not only have they done a great job of establishing new worlds, but, you know, now we've got like these YouTube videos where their storylines taking place with planeswalkers and all this other stuff. Now, to imagine that they got there from just this, but also that these characters are kind of the base of what happened in the set The Brothers' War, it's pretty impressive stuff. And the thing I'm actually most excited about moving forward with this show is kind of going over the lore and the storylines that we're going to see from future sets, because there's a lot going on in future sets.
Yeah, they're very different from each other, even early on. And that's one of the things I find to be most compelling about going back and studying early Magic. You have Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, which is a very generic, here's a broad sense of the world. But like I've said before, you're kind of thumbing through a monster manual or a Dungeon Master's Guide, getting a sense for what the things are. And from there, you go to Arabian Nights, very specific setting. You come here, very specific setting. It then gets broader again at Legends and sort of narrower, sort of not when you get to the Dark. What makes this different from all the other sets for a long time is you can summarize the plot of this set in one sentence. All the other sets that are around this time, there's a generalized, well, it's the story of the Arabian Nights. Okay, well, there's legends and there's all these characters that are represented, but they're not necessarily like drivers of a story. They're just kind of characters that are off in their own world doing stuff. The Dark has even less of this. This is the first time that there's a drilled in plot featured around two main characters Those two characters' names are all over the cards, both flavor text and the names of cards themselves. And so it's a very specific execution of this sort of thing that Magic didn't really come back to for a very long time, in spite of the fact that this set kind of resembles a modern Magic set more than Arabian Nights or Legends or Dark from a creative standpoint.
That is the flavor, the lore, the storyline of Antiquities. When we do come back, we are diving into the mechanics of this artifact-based set. Now it's time for the mechanics of Antiquities, and much like with our Arabian Nights episode, there's not a ton to note here. ABU, they established a bunch, some with keywords, some without. Arabian Nights, less so. Here in Antiquities, even less. But there is one worth talking about, so we're going to dive into it. It is a non-keyword mechanic, and, it's a little bit of a masterpiece, I think one could argue. It's Mill, with one whole card, which is Millstone, which was the first card to introduce the mechanic of putting cards directly into the graveyard from the library. It is now keyworded in Modern Magic as milling. We see it on plenty of cards nowadays. I think of cards like Fractured Sanity, Glimpse the Unthinkable, Jace, and it being a planeswalker that does plenty of milling. So it's pretty ubiquitous now. Wasn't so early on in the game, but Millstone, the OG.
One of Magic's most important designs, opening up this design space. So there is the notion of decking in the rules from the jump that's in Alpha. But a lot of why you would have a rule like that is because how do we resolve games that otherwise can't be resolved? Basically, what comes in and intercedes and says, okay, neither of us can attack. We're in some sort of stalemate. Who wins the game from here? And decking allows you to have a winner in games that don't resolve. But in Alpha, it's not really a natural. There's no cards that are pointing you towards, I'm going to run them out of cards. That's the thing that I'm going to be doing. Millstone, as you mentioned, that's the first one. Part of what's brilliant about it is that it's not that strong. A question that gets asked a lot of game designers is, so casual players really hate the experience of being milled. So why do you do these milling cards all the time? And the answer is, one, they love to play with them as well for the same reasons they hate it. They think it's really powerful. But two, assuming it's not that powerful, they get to have the experience of beating the bad guy pretty often. Yeah. And that's a really satisfying thing to do, especially when I get the satisfaction of doing the invasive thing to you. I don't really care about winning or losing. I just want to have that emotional experience. You get to beat me, and we're both having a blast. I'm getting to do the bad stuff, and you're winning the game. So there's so a lot of my reticence around milling is I don't think it should be powerful. I think you should be careful about that being a strategy in tier 1. But Millstone is really modest. It allows people to play creatureless decks and have a different angle of attack, but not at a rate that you're supposed to be doing it in a competitive sense very often. Also, what's brilliant about Millstone, and this is reflected in a lot of the cards you mentioned, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Glimpse the Unthinkable, and a bunch of other card names, is it gives the idea, the flavor execution of your deck being sort of a representation of your mental sanity and wellness, and the act of milling is driving someone insane. Yeah. It's reflected on the flavor text, and a lot of the card names of the mill cards that you mentioned lean into that. So not only is it successful in terms of a mechanic that people really love that's inspired a million designs, it also came up with this cool abstraction for what's being represented, which is you're being driven insane, and that the way that that's reflected is your library, your store of information is being whittled away. It's awesome. Awesome stuff.
It is very, very well done. I think of card names for milling. I mentioned Fractured Sanity, which really hones in. Glimpse the Unthinkable, which hones in.
Think about the art. Someone holding
literally
their hand
doing that. I think of there's Maddening Cacophony, another one. Just like the names of all of the cards that mill.
Lobotomy, Cranial Extraction.
Right, yeah, those the cards that like kind of go into their decks as well. Yeah, they're really, really well named cards and are very much communicating the experience of going crazy, as you did mention. And I will also say that when you are getting milled out and losing, you're kind of going crazy because it's so frustrating. One of my favorite things about beating someone with mill is the person who's being beat by mill, they're so angry.
Yeah.
And like it conveys, I think a sign of a good game is that it conveys emotions out of people, right? And so if you sit down against someone like you're playing a modern tournament and they go like turn one Hedron crab off of a water grave or something, it's like, oh, okay, here we go. It's the mill person. Okay, fine. You know, the next turn they play Cacophony and the next turn they play for extra sanity. And the opposing player, even if they're very competitive, they're just like, this is so stupid, you know? But then when they're able to come back and beat the person with like 2 cards left in their deck, they're so happy. So you're conveying a very unique experience that really, you know, the only thing that kind of mirrors that to me is playing with and against burn, where you feel like you're just immediately, I'm on the clock right away. And like, this is a different experience as opposed to green creatures running into each other or Azorius control doing nothing against each other. And that's one of the things that makes Magic great is the experiences are very different, but they're also emblematic of what the cards are doing. You know, I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah. And what's cool about Mill too is that the experience is very different from life total.
Yes.
Not only 60 versus 20. And if we're being honest, part of the reason that Millstone is more modest at this point is people are incorrectly playing 85 cards all the time.
Sure.
It's really hard to mill someone out when they're just playing with all the cards they own.
Sure.
But there is a feeling that, and a reality that it's much harder to interact with what's going on. If you're attacking me with creatures, well, I can kill your creatures. I can gain life. There's a lot of sideways things you can do to interact with that experience. With Mill, it's pretty rare to have stuff that shovels cards from your graveyard back into your deck. Mm-hmm. Once it's gone, it's gone. That's very different from life totals, which have a lot of ways to go up over the course of the game. So part of what's brilliant about this too is not just the emotional experience of what you're describing, but it is tangibly different. It is not just a different life total because of the ways that players interact with life totals, the amount of toggling that a life total can have in between a game, inside of a game. It's very, very different. So this is a much more extreme and non-interactive play pattern, and it's cool to give something that's materially different. You don't want it just to be life total 2. And Infect is that as an example.
Sure.
Yes, some things play differently, but largely the experience is very much the same. Unblocked creatures are causing me to accumulate this. If I accumulate N, I'm dead. And this is an entirely different play pattern, which is very cool.
Let's talk about some creature types that were introduced into Antiquities because Mill is the only keyworded or non-keyworded mechanic to go over on today's episode. Many of the creatures in this expansion, Antiquities of course, are new and are artifact creatures. So we've just got a couple here. We've got Archaeologist, which was changed to Artificer. We've got Atog.
It's a Tog.
It's a Tog. Okay, we're going to go over that in just a bit, why it's a Tog. Druid, Gaia's Avenger, which was changed to Treefolk. Gremlin, which was changed to Oof, and then it was changed back to Gremlin. Poltergeist, which was changed to Spirit. And Sage, which was changed to Artificer. Originally, artifact creatures were printed without any creature type, except in special cases. Wall of Spears counts as a wall, for example. And this resulted in the overall limited use of creature types in the Antiquities expansion. With the printing of Antiquities, little Magic fun fact, maybe you win some sort of trivia contest for this, Magic had exactly 100 creature types.
That's a ton.
Through ABU, Arabian Nights and Antiquities, yeah, it's quite a few.
I mean, how many creatures are there even?
I don't know.
It's not that many more than 100.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly hope not.
It's like a second name. It's not even a creature type, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So Magic is getting pretty well established at this point, right? You've got, you're hitting a check mark in some respects with 100 creature types, which is very, very cool. You're establishing some very unique creature types as well. And now you're also establishing you're indirectly establishing a new mechanic in milling. Again, it's only one card in Millstone, but you're bringing a brand new gameplay experience that I imagine when someone who is playing at that time sees Millstone, for some people, they're going to go, that doesn't do anything. And some people are going to go, that's kind of interesting.
Well, I think also there's a little bit of read and respond. Like, Millstone's not a mechanic until it turns out that it's extremely popular.
Yeah, sure.
And then the game designers learn, this is a thing that we should be tapping into. Very similar to El Hajjaj from the last episode. Yep. It's so modest. Like, the card's so weak, even by the standards of that time, that if players are playing with it and having a good time and building decks around it, you've tapped into something. Yeah. There's something there you should try to replicate. And Millstone, I don't think there's the intent of, this is going to be the first of several hundred of cards that work this way. But people gravitated towards this experience so much that, okay, we should do more of this. People are having a good time.
And now it's here to stay. Those are the mechanics of Antiquities. When we do come back, we are diving into the cycle. Spoiler alert, there's not very many. It is cycles time here on the Antiquities episode of the Resleevables. And I gave you a little spoiler. I already told you that there's not many, but what I didn't tell you is there are not any. We're cyclists, partner.
How do you fit in a cycle in this set?
Well, also, there's so few cards. I guess they could have made more cards if they wanted to, but yeah, I agree with you.
So few cards.
Yeah.
Every card cares about artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the colors don't even have particularly well established identities of how they interact with artifacts.
Sure.
So it's like pretty hard to make like black cards that care about artifacts completely absent. So you just got to make them up.
Yep.
So there's no room, no cycles, just a bunch of cards.
Big donut. Now, if there could have been a cycle, what they could have done, this is clearly revisionist. There's a card called Urza's Chalice in this set, which follows the theme of the alpha lucky charms of Ivory Cup, Crystal Rod, Throne of Bone. Has that email been answered about Throne of Bone yet?
No, I'm
Okay.
still on hold.
All right. Iron Star and Wooden Sphere, right? So those alpha lucky charms, which are really positive, healthy designs. Urza's Chalice is an addition to that. Now, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, well, they could have just put the alpha lucky charms into this set, and then you do have a cycle in this set, but, you know, who knew that was going to be a thing? Who even knew they were going to be making cards still?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what we have here in terms of cycles or extension of cycles are find the designs from alpha where there are 5 of them, they're the same, and if you add artifact to it instead of whatever the color was, the design still works fine.
Sure.
So that gets you to the Silex, that gets you to circle protection artifacts,
Yep.
and that gets you to artifact ward.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. So we've completed those cycles.
Literally, what can we do?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we found the 3.
Yep.
We're going to put those in there.
Now we got to figure out the other 82 cards.
Right, yeah, 5% of the set's already done.
Yeah.
We're just moving through this thing.
Now let's talk about a 4th card here in Atog.
Atog.
He and I, we had a little chit chat about if it was a Tog or a Tog. And I call it a Tog. However, you have pulled back the veil on why it should be a Tog.
So back in the day, a Tog, potato, you would hear a Tog more commonly than a Tog. I think a Tog settles it. You cannot call that card a Tog. And so it's a Tog.
It's a Tog to me now, too. Now, I'm going to have to get used to calling it a Tog now because I've called it a Tog my entire life. But once you said a Tog, I cannot say a Tog.
Right. Well, also, Psych Atog.
I call it Psychotog.
Kron Atog.
Yep.
The only one that follows that convention, I think, is Megatog.
Meg Atog. Yeah.
But that's because the word mega exists. But so
Yes.
if you go through the names of all the Atogs, you will find that Atog gets you the right pronunciation a lot of the time, and Atog is pretty rare.
Well, if you want to go through the Atogs, we can do that.
Okay.
Because we're going to play a little game now. We're going to see how many of Magic's Atogs Patrick can name. I'm going to give you one on the house with Atog. You're welcome.
Okay, Atog. Chronotog.
That's number 2.
Megatog.
That's number 3.
Oratog.
Oratog checks out. That's number 4.
Psychotog.
Number 5.
Thaumatog.
Number 6.
Atogatog.
7.
Lithotog?
8.
4.
4 left.
My God, I'm not. Man, it's going to be tough from here. I'm tapping out.
4 Atog.
Foratog.
I don't know what that card does.
Probably it sacrificed forests, if I had to guess.
It strikes me as a green card. Necrotog.
Yep.
Faunatog.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is either. It's probably here right now. And Sarkatog, which I think is red-black.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. 12 total Atogs. I think there's also like a... I think there's like a totem. Chronotog Totem, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
That's ringing a bell.
Yeah, they made a Chronotog artifact, blue mana creature in Time Spiral. There's a cycle of 3 mana artifact, taps for N, and you can animate it into an old creature no one knows.
Yeah, because I played the Negator version. I think it was called Phyrexian Totem.
Yeah, there was 2-headed giant Nephroides Totem.
Well, let's see if we can name these.
Chronotog Totem.
The green one is Weatherseed Totem.
Weatherseed Treefolk Totem.
Yep.
And the white one.
So what's the black one?
Phyrexian Negator.
Okay, blue, Chronotog.
Yeah.
Red,
2-headed giant Nephroides.
Yeah, 2-headed dragon.
Giant Nephroides.
Yep, you're right. Okay, and then Weatherseed Totem.
Weatherseed Treefolk.
There's a white one?
I don't have it.
I don't have it either. We're not going to know what it is until the episode.
Yeah, I know. I don't have it. I'm sorry.
It's up there somewhere.
Yeah, Chronotog is a weird one to do as a totem.
Isn't it skip a turn?
It is skip a turn, so it doesn't work in the rules. like it does. You can only skip a turn that you have in the bank, I guess. You can't skip all of your turns.
Yeah, I mean, with that attitude.
But it's not clear why you would be able to skip one and not the rest.
That's also true.
So
it's true.
Chronotog's an early example of a card that doesn't work in the rules, but the confusion is answered by the fact that, well, if it works the other way, then it's just one hit kill all the time to skip my next 20 turns. So I guess I can only skip one, but it's not super clear in any event.
Yeah, they could just, if it worked the way that you're saying, which you skip all your turns, just change the name of Channel Fireball to Chronotog.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Mox Chronotog.
I don't need 2 cards. This.
Yeah.
You're dead next turn.
Right.
I mean, nice.
I'm really trying to think of that white totem now.
It's kind of bothering me too because we were playing a lot then, weren't we?
We were.
I was. Yeah. I think you were.
I was. It
I'm not
probably flies because none of the other totems fly.
Is there any reason it would have vigilance?
I mean, if it activated for low enough mana, you could offense defense with it. There's something to a vigilance creature that taps for mana that's kind of satisfying, but probably not. They're pretty expensive to activate. Yeah,
because my first thought is it's a Sarah Angel Totem.
I would have remembered that because of Celestial Colonnade. If they were the same, I think I would remember.
Yeah,
that.
Okay.
I don't have it. I'm sorry.
We'll have to take a look at the edited episode and see exactly what it is. That is the cycles for Antiquities. That's just what happens when there are none. It's a shorter part of the episode. But when we do come back, we're getting into the misprints and trivia aspect of the episode, and that's going to be a whole lot longer. See you soon. It is time for the misprints and trivia aspect of Antiquities, of which sometimes I try to lie to you guys and tell you that there's a lot of something when there isn't. There's not that many misprints, there's a lot of trivia. So let's dive into the misprints here pretty quickly. Margaret Organ Keenan, Kean, is how to spell that last name. Well, I spelled it right. Wizards of the Coast did not. It was misspelled as Keen on all 3 cards illustrated by her in this set: Amulet of Krug, Ivory Tower, and Martyrs of Corliss. I've got another unfortunate spelling error. Randy Asplund Faith's name was misspelled as Randy Apslund Faith. The S and the P are reversed in Asplund. On all 3 cards illustrated by him in this set: Clockwork Avian, Detonate, and Urza's Miter. Other misprints include the card Reconstruction was printed without the Anvil expansion symbol, and then Tanos' weaponry has not 1, but 2 variants. One is missing the gray circle behind the activation cost. Each version is equally rare.
Yeah.
So, given the number of misprints that we saw in Alpha Beta Unlimited, they're doing a pretty good job here now.
Yeah,
they're cleaning it up.
Yeah, and the Reconstruction error was actually kind of impactful back in the day because you thought the card was from beta.
Sure. Yeah.
How else would you know?
Yeah, I guess. So that's actually a really interesting point because, yeah, if you see a card without an expansion symbol, you think it's from that set. So you might think it's super rare or something, right? Because you've never seen it before. There's not a lot of this set that's come out. So it's just like, where did you get that card from? Because you couldn't just go check on the internet.
Right.
You couldn't do that.
I mean, ideally you're opening boosters and you sort of just figure it's an error or whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you encounter it in the wild for the first time, you could think it is just a card from beta you hadn't seen before.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty cool experience. Now we're going to get into the trivia aspect of things, of which there is quite a bit more to talk about. So let's dive in. Argothian Treefolk has the greatest combined power and toughness among green creatures in Antiquities. I believe it is a 3/5. Very powerful. Artifact Ward is the first card to use protection from artifacts and is similar to the wards found in the Unlimited or second edition. This one works within the rules?
Works just fine.
Good job. Good job. Ashnod's battle gear and Tawnos' weaponry inspired the creation of equipment, which is one of my favorite card types in all of Magic, and I'm curious if you agree.
I do really like equipment.
Okay.
Good story. Gameplay is pretty good. At the absolute upper bounds of what it does, it sometimes not great in my opinion, in that a lot of the cool experience about playing with auras is imagining like, oh, if I put this aura on this particular thing, I've created something that's greater than the sum of the parts. With a lot of the best equipment, Batter Skulls, swords, Mazawas Chite, you really don't care what you put it on. It's just, if I hit, it's just over. So the fact that the best equipment kind of doesn't care about what you're putting it on often, I don't think is great, but it's really evocative, gameplay solid. It's a really positive card type in my opinion. And lastly, it does give everyone access to certain types of stat modifications or keywords, even if their color doesn't necessarily have that. So it allows you to pay an additional expense to work outside the color pie, which I think is a good role for artifacts to have.
Let's dive into Atog once again. Greatest combined power and toughness among red creatures in Antiquities. It's a 1/2, which means the rest of the creatures in Antiquities are a 1/1.
It was so hard to attack back in the day. You people have no idea. If you're watching this, a lot of our comments on the YouTube page, it's like, started playing in 2015. I really enjoy these sort of breakdowns. Wasn't there, so people who can talk about it, who were like kind of there, informed about it, it's really cool for me. Rule number 1 of this era is you cannot attack. There's nothing. Power and toughness, it's really hard. It's really hard to come by. Antiquities is probably the worst set of all time when it comes to, is there anything I can attack with?
Sure.
Is there anything that I can possibly threaten my opponent's life total with? Argothian Treefolk's like a 3/5.
Yeah.
3/5s are pretty good at blocking. Like that's what a 3/5 is good for. This is the best attacker.
Yeah.
Is this bud over here?
At the time of its reprinting and revised, Atog was the most common card in print. As a result of its relative limited uses, especially without common artifacts in revised, this is what you were talking about earlier, with commons being, uncommon and maybe rare, it was generally disliked by many and hated by some at the time. The name is an anagram of goat, which I was unaware of, an animal that has a reputation for eating just about anything, which I was aware of. This is probably my favorite card from the set, just because it's such a little weirdo.
Well, it's also like kind of fun. You could imagine building a deck with this card and having a good time.
Yep.
A lot of cards in the set are just, it's really hard to have a good time with it.
Sure.
I don't know how else to put it.
Sure.
Atog is it's a different dimension to the thing. And what I also like about it in this set is, okay, so we're doing this like magic, specifically magic related world building. What are just some weirdo creatures that you would find in this world that's unique to this? And yeah, the art's a little goofy. And it's not like an Atog is a made up thing. As you said, it's just an anagram for a goat. But it does make the world feel a lot more alive that there's stuff like this in the set. Really, my fundamental critique of the set is it needs more cards like this. Even if you're going to do the all artifact thing, you need stuff with more personality and you need stuff that's fun sometimes.
Yes.
And Atog really nails that. And the set otherwise struggles with cards being fun.
Speaking of which, circle protection artifacts.
Finally.
Yeah, we got here. Similar to the other circle protections found in Unlimited, circle protection artifacts is only a little bit different because its activation cost is 2 instead of 1.
Yeah, because circle protections are horrible to do in general, but at least they learned 1 is not the right amount.
Good job by them. Good job. Citanul Druid, Citanul, is the word lunatic spelled backwards, which I would have never known if I didn't do this show.
And it's not the only time that word appears on Magic cards.
That's true.
They use it down the road, too.
Yeah, Urza's block, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird.
Clockwork Avian functions similarly to Unlimited's Clockwork Beast and is directly related to this card, which was popular at the time.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Continued to be.
Okay.
Clockwork Beast, Clockwork Avian, beloved designs from that area.
Very cool. No. This one, near and dear to my heart. Colossus of Sardia had the greatest combined power and toughness among all creatures in Magic until Leviathan showed up in the dark. 9 mana, 9/9 trample. You have to pay 9 to untap it.
Yeah, setting aside the power level, which is very low, it is a little annoying that the one creature in the set that can attack is bounced around not untapping. It's like, can you just let me pay some life or something and keep this going? Like, why don't you just let me attack with it, balance it some other way? Whatever that looks like is fine.
I like the idea of when they started making really, really large creatures at the early stages of Magic of just being like, I don't know how to make this thing fair, so you have to pay a ton to untap it. It's basically all you get to do for the rest of the game.
Well, imagine that you're playing sealed deck.
Okay.
Because Magic back then is much closer to sealed deck than constructed. You're building on what you have. And then also imagine that the cheap creatures don't do anything.
Sure.
Like you are excited to get a 2/2 for 3. In that world, Crawlworm actually is pretty good.
Yes.
Like it's better to be adding Crawlworms to your deck than cutting them.
Yep.
So the reason people have all these stories back in the day of like, oh yeah, I traded my Mox for a Shivan Dragon. I traded my Mox for 2 Sarah Angels, whatever. It's like, if you're playing games back then and only trying to win, that's correct. That's the thing. That's the thing that people don't get there. Often that's a misunderstanding of this era is if you're playing with, I have 10 packs and you have 10 packs and I have a Shivan Dragon and you have a Mox Ruby, I'm favored, not you. Because what's your Mox Ruby going to power out?
Nothing.
Minotaur?
Yeah,
Sit there and look at my Hurloon Minotaur until I cast my Shivan and kill you with it.
Sure.
So it is funny to think about that stuff coming in now in retrospect, but people didn't just like suddenly get good at games in 2018.
Yeah.
People just understood the game in front of them as they understood it. And in that world, the big creatures are like legitimately good if you're playing against people whose collections are in a similar state to yours.
That makes sense.
Plus, the Sardia sucks no matter what. that thing is way too bad. But I'm talking about the reasonable big creatures.
Let's go to Cursed Rack.
I also really appreciate last little bit on Colossus of Sardia
Yes.
is that you can use Mishra's Workshop to cast it, but not to untap it.
Oh, that's nice. Is that nice? That's maybe not nice.
Can I attack? Please tell me how I can attack this again. I just wanted to get this game over with.
Cursed Rack with art by Richard Thomas features the same yellow tortured doll in its art as is found on Black Vice in the Rack. My man over here is going to educate you on the doll, Black Vice, and the Rack.
So you might think that these are just kind of random designs. They are not.
Mm-hmm.
There is a story going on here. It is building out the world, much in the way that Millstone suggests you're being driven insane by having your mental faculties messed with. Black Vice says, how do we represent someone having a large hand size? It's like, oh, they're obese. How do we represent someone having a small hand size? Oh, they're really skinny. Because the way that Black Vice works in the art and mechanically is the doll is in the vice. Mm-hmm. So naturally, the bigger the doll is, the more easily and effectively Black Vice harms it.
Yes.
Similarly, the rack, you're being, pulled apart from your wrists and ankles. The thinner you are, the easier it is for you to get pulled apart. And how do you solve the dilemma that Black Vice and the rack have? Just be in perfect physical condition. 4-card hand.
That's it.
No damage from Black Vice. You're in too good shape. No damage from the rack. You're in too good shape.
That's right.
So I know that a lot of people look at these as just sort of random designs or whatever. But even a teenage me was like, I think they're talking about what I think they're talking about. And I believe they were.
Let's go on to Felden's Cane. which was originally named Feldon's Ice Cone, which was an anagram for Don Felice Cone. Don Felice, I believe, was a designer or developer at Wizards of the Coast. When the word ice was removed due to the artwork, which was mistakenly depicted as a cane, the anagram no longer worked.
I want to give this one a pass because it's, again, one of the very few fun cards in the set.
Okay.
People love this thing.
I love this one.
They had to restrict it in spite of it just making your deck worse. Because people were having too much fun with it.
Feldon's Cane, baby. I loved that card. Golgothian Silex is one of the 3 expansion hosers cards printed in Magic's history. The other 2 are, of course, City in a Bottle from Arabian Nights and Apocalypse Chime from
Homelands. Take that, Wizard School.
That's right. It was named after Golgotha, the hill where Jesus was crucified. A Silex is an antique bowl. The word has many spellings. Okay.
It's interesting because this is the one world in early Magic that actually justifies this kind of design from just a flavor standpoint. Mm-hmm. There's a cataclysmic war going on between 2 brothers who are fighting over ancient artifacts of mysterious origins that open up portals to different dimensions. And so having a design like this makes more sense here, I would argue, than in the other 2 worlds. You shouldn't do this anyway, because
it's horrible.
This is not fun.
Yeah.
This is really not fun.
Yeah.
But of all the sets that have this sort of thing, I think this is the best one.
Magic, over the 30 years, of course, the designers have learned a ton, as one would expect. That's why it feels so egregious when a really, really good card slips through the door, right? Mm-hmm. Because they've learned so much, as you, again, would expect. So when Oko comes out the door, the way Oko comes out the door, everyone loses their mind because how could this possibly happen? Which I think is a fair question. I am very glad that we do not see hosers in the way that we did at the early stages of this game, like Conversion, like Tsunami, like Flash Fires. It is funny to me that later on down the road, some of these cards do show back up again, like Boil, but more often than not, it's like a creature that is modest, I guess I would say. Like, I'm thinking of Silver Knight right now. Like, that's a good card, but like, it's beatable and it's modest. It's not, you don't get to play anymore.
Well,
and
it's also balanced. More importantly, it's balanced against the right people.
Sure.
It's really good if you're playing with a sea of small red creatures that don't have keywords. That's the person you go after. If you have a dragon with flying, a creature with trample, you can play through that thing just fine. You can add a second color to your deck and remove it with a terror.
Sure.
That's going after the right people. That's really the fundamental failing of these cards, in my opinion, is the sets themselves don't suggest something about someone's deck. You can argue whether or not you're supposed to do Boil or Perish, but at least mono blue with a bunch of islands or mono green with a bunch of creatures suggests a play pattern that you may want to make something good against. Now, those designs are, not well designed, but there are versions that are a little bit more medium, like Silver Knight, that are really good designs.
Yeah.
Why would you need to go after someone who has a bunch of Arabian Nights cards in their deck? What is their deck? You don't know anything about what their deck does because they have a bunch of Arabian Nights cards in them. They just bought a box of Arabian Nights and they put whatever looked appealing into their deck.
They just got started.
Yeah, same thing over here. I mean, again, it's more justifiable here than in the other instances because at least Antiquities has enough of a mechanical vibe to it that if someone's playing with a lot of Antiquities cards in their deck, you can be pretty sure they're playing with a bunch of artifacts. Now, this set also contains Hurgle's Recall and Shatterstorm. So it's not like you're bending over backwards to like go after the artifact person.
Yeah.
But you, again, at least there's something there. The other ones are just like, what do you know about someone's deck because it has a bunch of Homelands cards in it? Other than they're bad and or they're broke. That's all you know about them. There's no reason to go after someone's Homelands deck. Just let them Minotaurs.
Just let them play.
They're sneaking showing in Minotaurs off their didgeridoos. None of them are close to worth putting into play at any amount of mana. Just let them play. Just bolt their Minotaurs. You don't need to destroy all their cards in perpetuity.
Ivory Tower is the exact opposite of Black Vice, both of which were popular and powerful cards at the time and were restricted as a result. You, I believe, lived through this restriction.
It was correct. Black Vice as a 4 of is extremely intense. Again, if you are grading on the curve where we're used to now in Magic, there's just a bunch of good 1-minute, 2-minute creatures going around, such that, or 1 and 2 minute removal, just whatever. You can do stuff early on in the game with your mana, such that you'll quickly get under Black Vice.
Mm-hmm.
And also, a lot of the best attacking creatures are like 3/3s for 2, or 2 power for 1,
sure,
or whatever. Black Vice, 1, people can't get cards out of their hand, and 2, to the extent they can, they deal way less damage than Black Vice does. I know this is kind of a silly card to look at and be like, oh, this was restricted, but at the time it was pretty cracked.
Yeah.
Most of our aggressive decks just started with 4 copies of Black Vice, kind of no matter what else was going on. In the case of Ivory Tower, much the same, even though it's probably weaker than Black Vice on balance, usually because dealing damage is better than gaining life out of a card that you actively chose in your deck, because you can make your deck care about dealing damage, but there's no guarantee your opponent's deck cares about you gaining life. You could just sit back and do nothing and gain 3 life a turn, and your opponent had no shot of doing anything.
Sure.
And if both players had 4x Ivory Tower in their deck, good luck.
We're gonna be here a while.
You gotta get the millstones out. We are not. Sarah Angel is not getting you through that one.
Martyrs of Corliss had the greatest combined power and toughness among white creatures in Antiquities. We got Millstone here, is notable for almost single-handedly making it a viable strategy to win by forcing your opponent to draw from an empty library. This card coined the term milling, as we mentioned earlier in the show, and is now a keyword mechanic now. We've got Mistress Factory, which was printed with 4 different artworks, each depicting the same factory in each of the 4 seasons. This card later inspired the creation of Blinkmoth Nexus. I know some feedback in the YouTube comments. We look at them, don't you worry, saying, you know what? It'd be awesome if you guys kind of highlighted some of the cards that stood out in the sets and maybe don't fit into our categories, right? So Alpha Beta Unlimited, we didn't really talk about Swords of Plowshares, which we didn't. That's a fair critique. Or Lightning Bolt or some of the other cards. Mistress Factory, I spent a little time here because this is a sweet card.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So, again, on the very short list of cards from the set that are fun, on the even shorter list of cards in the set that not only are fun, but the power level has held up.
Yes.
This card was really strong, but not by any means unbeatable or obnoxious at the time or shortly thereafter, because it got printed in 4th edition and then it was pretty ubiquitous because they were much easier to find at that point. If you put it in a standard nowadays, I believe it would be roughly the same in most standard formats. It would be strong, not unbearable, but a card that people played and was good. It has inspired a bunch of different designs. It is way different than all the other lands that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would give it a high grade as an individual design, even if it didn't play all that well or the balance was way off, because the inspiration for coming up with this sort of thing is pretty incredible. There's really no analog to this at all in early Magic. But the fact that the power level has held up over time is really impressive, especially considering what a crater this set is otherwise for cards you would describe that way.
Speaking of which, Mishra's War Machine.
Bang.
Quite the banger. Has an upkeep cost of discarding a card, which is a drawback so harsh it made this thing not good. The drawback inspired the creation of Masticore, as its creators felt challenged to make a card that was worth playing with such a harsh drawback. And when we do get to Urza's Destiny, that's when Masticore is?
Yeah, well, it's not a really great design challenge to try to solve, because what's a card that can be strong if I don't get to play any more cards for the rest of the game? And it's like, okay, well, that sounds like a card that is really strong and locks your opponent out.
Sure.
Lo and behold, Masticore, they did it. They were able to figure it out.
So, one of my favorite things about Masticore is, for someone who has started playing in 2015, 2016, whatever, that card doesn't look powerful. And I was not playing competitive Magic at that time, right? So it's before my time. The only thing I know about Masticore for sure is that card was busted.
It was busted. First of all, they banned Kurting.
Sure.
All right. We'll start.
That one's for you, Tommy Ashton.
We'll start there.
Okay.
Banned Kurting.
Okay.
that was the sensibilities around what you could do with a 1-mana creature. Now, Urza's block, they increased the power level in some places, but you still were not getting creatures that were particularly robust. Also, just the 1-for-1 defensive measures, free counter spells that were pretty common at the time. I mean, there were some matchups where Masticore was not that strong. Mm-hmm. Got sideboarded out a fair bit if your opponent was playing combo or not playing much in the way of creatures. But the best stuff was just, to the extent there were good creatures to attack with, there were just 1-mana 2/1s and 2/2s. So, like, you just play Masticore, and it's like, okay, no blocks, I guess, on your next attack. And now I have Visara that regenerates for the rest of the game. So it's your turn.
Yeah, sure. Oh, thank you.
The best cards in your deck are just other 2/2s for 1.
Sure.
Yeah. So you can't really get out of it. It doesn't look strong by modern sensibilities, nor would it be. Mm-hmm. But at the time, given what creatures were like and, how much mana was just floating around. Also, that's another thing about Masticore is, like, it was in a standard format with Grim Monolith and Gaia's Cradle.
Sure.
You were not lacking for mana.
Sure.
Even if they somehow got their hands on a 4/4, that was dead too.
Sure. Okay.
So anyhow, they solved the challenge.
Yeah.
It's a really weird, like, why would you care about doing that? Like, oh, how do we make a card that has a discard card every turn work? I was like, I can tell you what it'll look like. I have a really good sense of that. I can guess whether or not you want to do it at a high rate, that's up to you. But it's not a hard one to figure out.
It's probably not going to be very fun.
You know what's another card you could put an upkeep cost on and it could be good sometimes? Moat.
Yeah, sure.
Or the Abyss. Because it doesn't matter if I don't draw a card anymore. So there you go. The War Machine, on the other hand, very much not that.
Yeah, not good. Yeah, not good.
It's a 5/5. It's a 5/5 or 7 when everyone's deck starts off with 4 Disenchant, 4 Source of Plowshares.
It does band.
Most of the strength of banding is actually nested in, like, a 5/5 with banding is not 5 times stronger than a 1/1 with banding. Mm-hmm. So it's not the type of thing you want to go out of your way to put onto a large creature. Like, that's not the strong thing to do with it. No one played this even during my time. This is one of the big creatures that I'm like, I never saw anyone play this. I'm pretty sure.
Mishra's Workshop. First card to restrict how the mana it produces can be used. Mishra's Workshop is the only land printed Antiquities that has only one art associated with it. Let's go on to Amulet, which was originally intended to be named Amulets, plural, which is the anagram for Soulnet, but the art has only one creature in it, so the name was changed to the singular version. The reference reflects the ability printed on the card.
This was known in my local circle as the picnic table due to the art. And the mechanic, too. Because you sit down and eat.
Yep. Once you look at it now as a picnic table, you probably won't be able to look at it as anything else. I'm living proof of that. Ornithopter, all-time banger, no sarcasm, is the first creature to cost 0, demonstrating that the cost of a card from your hand is worth something by itself.
Right. So let's go back to what exists for 0 mana leading up into this point.
Creatures Moxes? It's Moxes and Lotus, right?
Right.
Okay.
Trying to think if there's anything in Arabian Nights. I don't think so.
I can't say for sure.
There's lands that don't make mana, which you could kind of argue is a 0 mana thing, but it's still different. Ornithopter rules. It's great in a number of respects. One, it's like a sweet game piece. It makes the world feel bigger here. This is another critique that I have is not everything in a war is a tank. Too much of this set, I think, is trying to do that. And Ornithopter is like, oh, this is like a weird little gadget friend. Yeah. It doesn't really do any fighting on its own, but maybe it, flaps around and gets you like beakers off the wall, whatever it does.
Delivers a telegram.
Yeah, it's super charming. Super charming. I also like that, as you said, it doesn't really do anything on its own. It naturally sort of begs the question, well, what do you do with this thing to make it useful? Mm-hmm. And it has flying, which all kind of gives you the first start of like, well, what would be good to do with a 0 power creature with flying? Buff it up. There you go. Now I'm like evading their blockers and hitting early on. People build decks in my local area so much with Ornithopter and Unstable Mutation and Holy Strength. Like it is so simple and so evocative for the world. Plays really well. encourages playing with other sweet cards, and still shows up in Magic sometimes because turns out a 0 mana creature with flying and as an artifact.
That's
there's
helpful.
Some stuff. There's times where that comes up.
Yeah.
You make the right enablers, that card still can hang. Awesome.
Big fan of this card. Big fan. 2004, me didn't like Ornithopter. 2023, me is like, nah, this is a really well designed card.
Yeah, well, you didn't like it because it's the type of card that lets weaker players beat you.
That's also true.
Because you top deck your Ornithopter on turn 5.
Yeah.
Theirs are in their opening hand going first.
Sure.
No, I think there is something to like.
No, I agree with you.
It is a card that when it is in decks, implies some pretty randomized games are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be frustrating because so busted in your opening hand or so busted with the right enabler. Otherwise, it sucks.
Yeah.
And for PTQ winning Grand Prix grinding Cedric Phillips, that is annoying.
Yeah.
But now you can just appreciate it for just being one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, I'm an old man now. I don't care about that stuff anymore. Sage of Latinam, you got some facts, some trivia. He's bringing the trivia on this one, not Mashit.
I don't know if this is still true because all the sort of ancillary remastered editions, I don't know if it made it in.
Sure.
But it was true as of Dominaria that this card was printed exactly 3 times. Once at common, once at uncommon, once at rare. Do not know if that is true of any other Magic card.
It's also the only blue creature in Antiquities. If there are... You're welcome.
Did you come here to attack?
Yeah.
You found the wrong... It is weird for a set that's supposed to be about a war that nothing can attack.
Yeah, it's a very peaceful war.
Right.
If there are other creatures that... What's the requirements again? Printed once as
exactly 3 times.
Okay.
In, like, regular releases. Not remastered, not Commander, whatever, but, like, a booster box for draft, essentially.
Okay.
And printed exactly 3 times. Once a common, once an uncommon, once a rare.
Let us know in the comments about that. Sage was printed as a common in this set, a uncommon in
Dominaria,
and then a rare in 8th edition.
Right.
Okay.
8th edition, 7th edition, 6th edition might muck this one up because I know when we did Arabian Nights, it was like, oh, Flying Carpet was a rare in one of the core sets.
Yeah.
So there's probably some other common in the original set, rare for God knows what reason in one of the terrible core sets, and then uncommon where it belonged the whole time, sometime in the 2000s. But I don't know for sure.
Su-Chi. Su and Chi are the Mandarin and Taiwanese words for 4. Su-Chi is a 4/4 creature that costs 4 mana to summon, and if it goes to the graveyard, gets you 4 mana. So just good design based off of the name. Strip Mine was printed in order to compete and provide a universal answer to Library of Alexandria, which proved quickly to be a very powerful card. Strip Mine has 4 different versions, as mentioned earlier in the show, each with a different artwork by Daniel. I'm going to go with Gelon, Gelon. Daniel, if I got your last name wrong, I do apologize. Patrick, we found our answer.
Yeah, we found a really surgical game piece to answer Library of Alexandria. Couple problems with this. It's really good when your opponent doesn't have Library of Alexandria because they have other lands that are good to blow up.
Sure, yeah.
Another problem with it is that it's also good when you have Library of Alexandria. So it's not like you're picking between one or the other. The answer turns out that you play both, and that bore out for a little while.
I would say that it accomplished its goal and other goals.
You got to play with 4 of those for a long time.
Can you imagine?
It's one of the most baffling things I think about the Magic banned and restricted list, the entire history, is how long you were allowed to play 4 Strip Mine. It was only, I believe, when Wasteland got printed that they were like, okay, now you play 4 Wastelands, there's only 1 Strip Mine.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice of them. Okay. Change up the experience a little bit. Tawnos' Coffin, like Ooblet before it, used phasing to hide a creature from play while it retained its counters, ores, and later equipment. This was later changed to exile. Tawnos is an anagram of Watson, as in Sherlock Holmes' sidekick. Tawnos is the henchman of Urza. We got Tetravis, which produced Tetravite tokens that cannot be enchanted. This is because its designers thought that the fate of the aura could be confusing, since the Tetravite could be seen as returning to the Tetravis as a +1/+1 counter. It also inspired the creation of Pentavis, which we called the bus back in Mirrodin block. So I think that's fair to not make it so the creatures can be enchanted by an aura. I think that makes some sense.
It's legit confusing.
Yeah.
I mean, the flavor of the card is it's floating away and then melding back.
Mm-hmm.
It is confusing what would happen with an aura in that world.
Yep.
Because the rules are fall off, but the story is pretty strongly implies would attach back on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fine to call it out there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's totally fine. Let's see here. Urza's Chalice is just like the Lucky Charms, as I mentioned. Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower, collectively known as the Urzatron, each have 4 different versions with different artwork by a single artist in this expansion. So let's dive in here to the Tron after I get through these last 2 real quick. Yawgmoth's Demon, greatest combined power and toughness among black creatures and antiquities, 6/6. And then Yoshin Soldier, the designers thought of this 1/4 creature as a toy soldier, so they reversed toy Yoshin. You reverse the YOT, it's TOY. Toyin soldier. There you go. Anyway, back to the Urzatron. Loved and hated by many. What are your thoughts on some of Magic's most impactful lands?
I think they're at a baseline pretty sweet.
Okay.
If you play with A, B, and C, do something awesome, that's cool. The output is a ton of colorless mana, which is very different from most mana bases, which produce a small amount of colored mana. And so the cards that you play with once, in your Tron deck, your payoffs, are very different from other people's payoffs because you have a lot of mana to work with, but you're typically restricted by having very little, if any, colored mana. And that bears out in Modern. Wormcoil Engine and Karn Liberated. These are cards that don't really show up that much outside of Tron, and it's because of the specific incentives there. I don't like the fact that all the lands are the same. And some of that does speak to, well, the output's just a boatload of mana, so what else are you going to do? It is, but I do think it is, there's an opportunity here for some more evocative outputs that would play approximately as well.
Okay.
And in the context of the lands of this set that are, all right, Submission Factory is cool, but it's like make mana, destroy a land, make mana. It'd be nice just in terms of mixing up a little bit to have them do something else other than just make more mana when you assemble Tron.
So give an example. Like what, obviously hypothetical and putting you on the spot, but how would you maybe correct this? Because I don't really foresee something down the road like the Urzatron happening again. Stranger things have happened, but I would be surprised. But like, what is a market correction to this?
So if you're asking me what I'm tasked to make a Tron design.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you the things I don't like about Tron. One is cards are essentially all the same. And 2, the game of basically blowing up the lands is not that interesting or fun. 1, because you have to stop it, and 2, because all the lands are the same thing, that you're either just nuking tower in the dark, because that's the one that makes 3, so I guess all other things being equal, I would like to have them have less of that.
Okay.
Or you're making some other random guess based on what you think is the least likely one that they have another copy of,
okay,
rather than caring about what the card does. So imagine lands that are just, it's ABC, City's Blessing technology. When you have all 3 in play, the second ability locks in for the entire game.
Okay.
And then you have like deal 2 to a player, make a 1/1 token, loot, or whatever. You just come up with whatever. So that way, like, you playing against this might care about one piece way more than the other. And also, it is sort of naturally drawing the game towards a conclusion, because the lands themselves are having some sort of power that is actually pushing the game forward. That's a super off the cuff idea, but basically the two key things are, 1, make the lands do different stuff and use City's Blessing to not make the game about breaking it up so much as getting rid of the one that you're specifically afraid of.
Okay.
And then 2, have them do different stuff that isn't just making more mana.
Okay.
You could even talk me into one of the Tron pieces being taps for 2.
Sure.
If the other 2 were like doing something more
put a
proactive.
+1/+1 counter on something.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, you can make it
do
whatever you
something
want.
different. Yeah.
Well, folks, that is the trivia, and the misprints from Antiquities. I told you that part was going to be a little bit longer. And now we get to the most fun aspect of the show. It's time to dole out some awards right after this. All right, it is time for my favorite part of the show. We know it's one of your guys' favorite parts of the show. It's the Antiquities Awards show. And as always, we are going to kick things off with the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for the best card in the set. I'm going to let you begin, as I always do.
I'm going to give it to Strip Mine.
Okay.
I think there's a reasonable argument for Workshop. And, you know, if you scale up power level, you go to higher power formats like Vintage, a very reasonable argue that Workshop is better. Although part of that is that you can play 4 copies and Strip Mine's always restricted. But Strip Mine's just the one card in the set that's obvious. Obviously, if you just put this into Standard, it would not survive 24 hours of legality. And some of the other cards, you know, like Workshop.
I was going to say Workshop would survive.
Some amount of the time. Some amount of the time it would also get banned immediately.
Yes.
Some amount of the time it's like, well, if it's a land that you can only tap for artifacts, at some point it matters what artifacts you're actually casting.
Yeah.
Strip Mine is are you kidding me?
Sure.
So I'll give it to Strip Mine.
I'm giving it to Workshop. I know we grade this award a little bit differently. I'm kind of looking at it historically, even though Strip Mine historically has been very good. But I also look at the ceiling of Workshop, where it's getting most of its work done in Vintage and is doing it in a very dominant fashion. Excuse me. The more that I do think about this, I could see Strip Mine being the winner here for me too. But I'm just going to go towards Workshop and its history and dominance.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable. Also, there's value over replacement. Like, how much stronger is Strip Mine than Wasteland? It depends, right? There's nothing analogous to Workshop for the decks that want it. It's like a 14 out of 10 for those decks.
Yeah.
That's part of it too.
Carnival of Souls Award for the worst card in the set. My selection is Cursed Rack. It doesn't do anything. You have to discard down to 4 cards. All right.
It's an interesting question. I might give it to Mishra's War Machine. I'm trying to toggle my answer through this lens.
Okay.
What card would be most damaging to my win rate were it to show up in my opening hand in every game of Magic I played for the rest of my life? And I think in this set, it would be the War Machine. Like, it's fair to say that, like, Cursed Rack would have 1 game out of 20 being absurd. They're land screwed or something, and it's just sick.
They're land screwed, but they get to keep their 4 best spells.
Yeah, but it could be. I'm saying, like, if you played 100 games,
okay,
you would have 1 or 2 games where it was like, oh, Cursed Rack was sick. Because their draw was bad, whatever.
All right.
There's no game that you play. Where you're like, oh, wow, it was looking bad for me. But then I drew Mishra's War Machine, turned the whole thing around. So I'm going to give it to the War Machine.
All right. I'm not going to fight you on this. I'm going to instead.
That to me, by the way, that test is the Alabaster Leech test. Assume this is in my opening hand and I had to play it for the rest of my life. Yeah. How many games do I win? Like, what happens to my win rate? I think the War Machine is like that's like as close to a mulligan to 6 as you can get.
Okay. I'm going to move to the Doomblade Award for the best non-rare in the set. My selection here is the 0 mana O2 flyer. It is Ornithopter, which coming into this, I didn't think was going to be my guess, but after conversations with you during our pre-show and stuff, yeah, Ornithopter is a banger.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. This category is a little tricky in the early sets because often the expansions didn't have rares.
Yeah.
They were doing the weighted uncommon common thing. So I'm going to try to answer through the lens of, is a good utility role player, much like Doomblade is, and does not get printed at rare today. To the extent that it gets reprinted, it is reprinted uncommon. I'm going to give it to Mistress Factory.
Okay.
Solid, workmanlike design. When it gets reprinted in some of the remastered sort of stuff, it typically appears as uncommon. Really fun, serviceable, solid, evergreen card.
Let's move on to the Oboro Palace in the Clouds Award for fun of, one of in the set. Your answer here is
Triskelion.
Yes.
1 Triskelion, so much fun. You have it in a combo deck with Mephistros Vampire? Great. You just play 1 Triskelion because it's actually halfway decent for 6 mana and nothing else in the set is.
Sure.
Cool. Some synergistic stuff, some just face up stuff, do stuff with counters. Really fun card. Really fun card.
Surprised this one hasn't been reprinted more.
So Triskelion it was in Mirrodin. It was reprinted as a rare in Mirrodin.
Yep.
Has it come back since then?
I don't know. I really don't know. I kind of like, it seems like it's honest enough that you could bring it back.
Yeah, it's like really.
Maybe it's too low power.
But who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? I mean, I know that people care about that, including people who work on Magic. I'm saying who cares? It's fun.
Sure. My fun
Put it on uncommon. I don't care.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a rare.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a rare.
Put it on uncommon, make it a colorless to remove a counter, and change the number around.
Sure.
It's fun.
Sure.
It's a fun card.
My fun of one of is Millstone. Sometimes you'll see 2 copies, but I think you can get by with 1 copy and just be happy with that as a different way to win, something like that. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mystic Confluence Award for the best vintage cube card in the set. There's only one answer here. Is Strip Mine. Yeah.
You won't be needing that. Yeah, Strip Mine.
Goes in every deck.
I ever told you my gunslinging, or my Richard Garfield gunslinging story?
No.
Are you familiar with the idea of gunslinging?
It's when you play against someone.
Yeah, like someone famous sits down at a table.
Yeah.
And is, just has decks.
Yeah.
So I was at some event. Richard was there, the father of Magic.
The man.
And he's got his casual deck, whatever horrible deck he had.
Okay.
And so there's a line of people like waiting to play him. And I walk past the line to the table, see the game in progress. And some person who's like thanking Richard really profusely and is really like, I love this game so much. It's meant so much to me, like all that stuff. He's got Richard Garfield Crucible Strip Mine locked. Just every turn, just strip mining him while Richard's has just nothing but shipping dragons or whatever.
Thank you so much for making this game.
One of my favorite moments ever associated with Magic was just watching Richard Garfield just discard a hand size while this guy was thanking him for the privilege of doing this to him.
I've always wanted to do this to you,
yeah.
And now I can. Smothering Tide Award for the best commander card in the set. Our answer is Mishra's Workshop, with the caveat of I've checked out the YouTube comments. This is where we're getting the most controversy here because people are coming in. A lot of Commander fans out there. Respect to all of you who love some Commander out there. I don't play Commander. You maybe probably played more Commander than me.
I thought the whole point of Commander was like rule zero. You just do what you ever want to do. I wasn't under the impression that there was a right or wrong answer to Commander questions.
Yeah. Also, there's not a right or wrong answer really to the
there's
awards.
no metagame or tournaments. It's just people playing with the cards they enjoy.
Yeah. So,
I mean, if it's competitive EDH, then I think Workshop is a pretty easy answer.
Assuming that it's legal.
It is.
Which I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, they usually make the archetype-specific cards like Workshop and Bazaar. Those cards are legal because if you don't know one, who cares? You build some other deck.
Sure.
They are much more heavy-handed, I think, correctly with things like Moxes or Time Walk, where you would just play it all the time in every deck if it was legal.
Yeah.
Workshop is like, I don't have one, so I just don't build a Workshop deck.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. So that's our answer. And for you, though, for those of you who are passionate about Commander out there, we love you. And just know that we are not Commander players, and we're still going to be doing the reward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're not outsourcing this.
No, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Pack Rat Award for the best limited card in the set. Again, never played Antiquities Limited, but I've got a feeling that Circle Protection Artifacts might be okay.
Millstone, definitely correct.
I think
yours
is
wrong
better.
With Strip Mine, Mission's Factory. I'm sure they're great.
Sure.
You cannot attack. You cannot attack.
I do think that Millstone is probably the right answer.
Yeah, Millstone's probably just, you can't. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah. Hit me with your red 1/1.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah. Sage the Latinam is just trucking on in. Just giving those, just laying hands.
We got the Char Rumbler Award for the weirdest card in this set. If you remember yours.
Give me a moment.
It's blue.
Transmute Artifact.
Yeah, I'm going to get mine up on my phone to read, but you can go ahead and explain Transmute Artifact.
So Transmute Artifact is kind of a weird design, like pretty specific. It's actually a cool card. It's pretty aspirational in terms of deck building and all that. But what's so weird to me about this card is that it came before Tinker, not after.
Okay.
Because this is basically fixed Tinker. The issue with Tinker is, well, cheating 8 mana plus tutoring on turn 1 is a bit much. What if
I guess it was turn 1 sometimes.
Maybe, what if we had to make it so that you have to pay the gap in mana?
Okay.
So maybe you're doing some synergies with some enters the battlefield, leaves play sort of stuff. And the tutoring has value, but it's not about cheating on mana. And then you get to Urza's Legacy and it's like, no, just let it rip. just open up the engine and just let it rip. No speed limits, no no stop signs, no nothing.
I wonder if there's a directive that someone said, we need you to increase the power roll of this game substantially.
Well, it is. I mean, there was some of that going on at the time, but it was also just the trick that game designers do to themselves all the time of like, well, we don't have a problem with tutoring and cheating mana. And it's like, yeah, you don't have a problem with it because you're mindful about not doing it.
Sure.
It's not like we do it all the time and it works.
Sure.
It's just there's adults in the room who say, hey, how about we don't have people cheating 8 mana and tutoring on turn 1?
Sure.
And then eventually someone's like, well, transmute artifacts is like not even that good.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, well, it isn't, but it's also not ruining anyone's time like Tinker does.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then you just have the World Championship being like turn 1 Tinker for Processor or turn 1 Tinker for Mishra's Helix.
That's I've seen that, yeah. And you can't play spells. Yeah, you don't get to play anything for the rest of the game.
No, you get to play one thing, make it count. You get to play one mana card.
Sure.
You got a Pouncing Jaguar in there, we'll race. But otherwise, that's not what's happening. Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at my selection. I had to get this off my phone because there's quite a few words here. My selection is Bronze Tablet.
Oh, God.
So let's go and I'm going to read this 6 mana mono artifact word for word here for you folks. 4 colorless. Target any card opponent has in play, semicolon. Remove it and Bronze Tablet from game. You become owner of that card and your opponent becomes owner of Bronze Tablet. Exchange is permanent. Play as interrupt. Opponent can prevent exchange by spending 10 life. This discards Bronze Tablet. Damage preventing effects cannot counter such loss of life. Bronze Tablet comes into play tapped. Remove this card from deck if not playing for ante.
All right, what do you want to say about this one?
Well, I love an ante card. So this is going to be in my deck, which immediately makes my deck illegal if I'm not playing for ante. So that's number 1. 10 life's a lot. I also like that it enters the battlefield tapped so you can't just 10 mana do it.
No, that's actually good. Like, you do want to give someone a turn to brace for this.
Sure.
A couple problems with this card. It suggests that it's legally binding.
Yes, it does. Exchange is permanent.
Does it have split second? Like, can I allowed to concede in response? None of that's clarified on the card at all.
Okay.
Another problem is most of the anti-designs are like, I add a card to my pile and I get some sort of advantage. Mm-hmm. Or something similar to that. Mm-hmm. Something where we're messing around with the pile, but the outcome of the game decides whether or not I'm going to get the stuff or not, or if you're going to get it. This just steals it no matter what.
That's mine.
This has nothing to do with the outcome of the game. It's just like, oh, by the way, I'm just taking your mocks right now.
That's mine.
The third, not clarified in the text at all, and not surprising because the card's so long. What if I'm at 6? Can I pay the 10? Or you just, and can I concede in a response? Does this thing have split second? Because the text box makes it sound like it has split second.
It does.
Like there's nothing you can do about it. Play this ability as an interrupt. As an interrupt, that's counterspell speed. That's counterspell. This is the first split second card. We found it. I thought we were gonna have to wait to get to Time Sprawl. I'd never had this realization until now. See, as a game designer, you're always learning. This is the first. Yes. This is the first card with split second. It's split second. Steal a card of your opponent's
forever.
Nothing to do with the outcome of the game.
That's right. You can have the tablet now.
I think, Cedric, that is a fine choice.
Let's take a look at the blank award for best card name in the set. For me, it's a Tog. Not a Tog. It's a Tog. For you, it is
Candelabra of Tanos.
Correct.
I like the more of the same reason that I like Ornithopter so much. Of just here's like a weird magical item that isn't directly about fighting, but it has other cool magical powers.
Mm-hmm.
Something I think this set could use a little bit more of. Also, this card was beloved at the time, even though there was nothing you could do with it.
Yeah, because it like wasn't cracked then.
Yeah, so if you had a horrible Tron deck and you assembled Tron, you could start doing that.
Why did it have to be horrible?
Well, I mean, I could tell you the story about Eugene Harvey's Tron deck. He got his hands. I don't remember if it was because he got his hands on enough boosters of Antiquities or it was when Chronicles came out.
Okay.
But whatever. He built the first Tron deck I ever saw.
Okay.
No search, no card drawing.
Don't need it.
Threats included Mishra's War Machine. So I guess I did actually see someone play Mishra's War Machine was Eugene. The Hive, Colossus of Sardia, the Clockworks.
Okay.
It's possible Wall of Spears was actually in there, both because it's actually the 1995 Matter Reshaper.
Yeah.
In that, like, it's early defense plus you can cast it even if you don't Tron. And if you do natural Tron, you can play 2 on turn 3. It's very similar to Matter Reshaper. Also, everyone's deck has 4 strip mines.
Okay.
So you have no shot of ever assembling Tron. And if you do, it's not like you even do anything good.
Okay.
That was the first Tron deck I ran up against. It's beautiful.
Honest.
So you could wash Candelabro Tanos through Tron. You, I guess, could set up things where you were activating your Library of Alexandria or Bazaar Baghdad a second time, but it could be a really, really bad and ineffective mana fixer.
Yep.
But it was really desired at the time in spite of there's nothing you could do with it.
Because you're thinking of all the things that you could do with it, even though you couldn't do anything with it.
Well, if they make more lands that tap for 2, then maybe we got something going on here. Eventually they did.
John Avon Award for Best Land Artwork in the Set. My selection is Urza's Power Plant with the Busy Bee. And your selection is?
Winter Factory.
Yep.
Sweet.
It is really sweet.
Don't even know if I would say the art's objectively very good or the best in the set, but it is weird and expensive.
Yeah.
And that's a flight of honey from me.
Our Aurelius Fury Award for Most Overhyped Card During Preview Season and our Tarmogoyf Award for Most Underhyped Card During Preview Season will be coming down the road, but we always remind you about them because I know that people do like those awards.
I would bet my bottom dollar that to the extent there were previews and hype that the most overhyped card was Colossus of Sardia.
I was going to actually say exactly that card. It's the biggest card I've ever seen.
Yeah, there's nothing bigger.
Yeah, it just has to be that card. What do you think the most underhyped card was then?
Probably Strip Mine.
Okay, I was gonna say
I'm guessing it was Strip Mine.
I was gonna say it's either Strip Mine or Workshop.
Well, even back, I mean, it's fair at the time. There's not that much you can do with a Workshop.
Yeah.
The best things that you could do at the time were like Juggernaut and Suchi, which is not bad.
It's pretty good.
Which is not bad by the standards of the time, but
Yes.
we're not talking about like turn 1 Trinisphere or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So maybe Workshop is a fine answer, but also can appreciate it being a little underrated.
Mm-hmm.
I bet that Strip Mine was not properly appreciated until a day or two after the set came out. And then people got the hang of it real quick.
That leaves us with just one final thing left to do. Alrighty, buddy. Let's close her down. Let's give out our final grades here for Antiquities. Patrick, for you, which card won the set?
I'm going to give it's a close call between Millstone and Mishra's Factory. I'm going to give it to Mishra's Factory.
Okay.
It is, plays really well, super appealing, inspired a million designs, power level holds up, and it's so different than any other card prior to it. I give a lot of credit to who came up with the idea first, and this is so not derivative. You can't point to something else and say, oh, that's where they got the idea from. Living Lands and Cormus Bell are the closest thing, and that's quite a bit different. The fact that it's an artifact and makes colorless mana in a set that's about artifacts and colorless mana is a nice little bonus. And it's still fun and appealing and well-liked today. Great design.
I sometimes, how I give this award and answer this question kind of just varies on my mood. This time, I'm going to give it to Mishra's Workshop. I think the most iconic card from the set, certainly the most expensive. That part's pretty easy to figure out. the highs are very high. The lows really aren't that low. People do like to do kind of broken things, and this kind of checks the boxes of that. So I am going to go ahead and give it to Mishra's Workshop. I don't think there's a lot of controversy about that, but I do like your answer as well. And now we are going to give the set a grade. I'm going to go first because I think you're going to be a little more long-winded about this. I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going to give it a 5. As I mentioned previously, I'm kind of holding out for my 1s and my 2s and my 9s and my 10s. But, you know, this set here in Antiquities, they took a really big swing with this one. I think they mostly failed. I get wanting to have an artifact-based set, and that's a very hard thing to do for your second expansion. For sure, we have seen other versions of artifact-based sets or just something-based sets over the course of Magic history be done much better, which, again, you would expect because people get better at designing and developing cards as the game goes longer and longer and longer. Great. But if that's true, that also means that the initial attempt at such a thing is probably poorly done. And I think this was mostly poorly done. The artifacts aren't really anything special. The non-artifacts are frankly bad. I was going to say like they're okay. Now they're just bad. They're just pretty bad cards. And the experience, I just don't think was that great. I think that they took on a massive task here that was, I think, going to be a failure more often than it's going to be a success. And so that's why I give it a 5. There are some cards that are cool. Ornithopter still holds up. Workshop still holds up. So Strip Mine does not. So there are some cards that are neat here, but by and large, I think they missed the mark.
So I'm going to give this set a 6.
Okay.
I think there's some very high highs and some very low lows. And the high highs count for a lot because it informs a lot of Magic design today. The high highs, we're going to tell a Magic-specific story, not us interpreting Dungeons & Dragons or the Arabian Nights stories through the lens of Magic, but we're going to make our own thing. And we're really going to focus in on mechanics rather than just making a heap of cards. 2 huge steps forward for Magic. And there are ways in which Antiquities is more analogous to sets that get made today than any other set around Antiquities in terms of the time. Those are the positives. The negatives, way too extreme.
Yeah.
You got to make some normal cards for normal people who don't have a lot of artifacts, especially this early on in the game. And the set just has nothing if you're not buying into the conceit. The cards are not that much fun, by and large. There's creatures that don't attack. To the extent there are powerful colored cards, it's Shatterstorm and Hurkyl's Recall, where most of it lies there. Not awesome. If it's supposed to be artifact matters. The lands are, I love Mistress Factory, obviously. The rest of them are some combination of really powerful and really boring. It's just mana and trading mana.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing that I'm pretty critical about this set is, and I felt this not in a way that I would be able to say out loud, but I had a sense of this at the time as a player. The cards that say Mishra and Urza on them give you no sense of what these characters are about at all. It would be really nice to be able to say, oh, Mishra does this sort of stuff and Urza does that sort of stuff. And I could build a Mishra deck or an Urza deck, or at least pick which character I was rooting for based on the designs that I saw with their name on it and the types of mechanics they apply.
Sure.
It's all over the place. I mean, you have Mishra's War Machine and Urza's Avenger.
Okay.
You have Urza Tower and Mishra's Factory.
Mm-hmm.
There's just you can't pull out anything about the marquee characters of the storyline through the flavor text, by and large, and from the cards that have their names on them.
Yep.
And I think if you could go back in time, even if you kept all right, we're doing a set that's 85 artifacts. Okay, I don't think that's a great idea. But assume we have to do that set in stone. My number one priority would be, how do we make the differences between Mishra and Urza something that comes across in the cards mechanics, the cards that have their names on them? And it's just absent. And I think that's there's an opportunity, as good as the world building was in the set, as much as it informs Magic's current world building, I think there was an opportunity there to create more architecture around who are these two characters and what are they about. And even if you kept the skeleton the same, you could go back and do that.
Well, there's our grades. And that's our review of Magic's second expansion, Antiquities. In the books, done and dusted. Where do we go next? Well, we are going on to Revised, which does have some similarities to Alpha Beta Unlimited for fairly obvious reasons if you know Magic at all. But there are some differences as well. And there's an introduction of something in Revised that is very important to Magic, which we're not going to tell you now. That's why you have to watch, but I'm kind of excited to go over this set.
I mean, this is the first set that I played with any regularity.
Beautiful.
It's my first. Arguably the dark sort of backfilled my decks, but the first piece of Magic product I ever received was a 2-player sealed Revised starter.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
That is super cool. So, Revised is up next, and as always, thanks for watching The Resleevables. No beeps. We should be good.
No boops.
No beeps, no boops. Until there are beeps and boops.
Go Tigers.
Yeah, go whoever's playing college sports. Close to my face. There we go. All right. Here we go.
Do we need the...
Yeah, we do. I think it's on your side. Good job. Good job, partner.
Resleevables. Antiquities. Take 1 of 1.